speakers, discussants, and the participants of the program. Can you hear me? Okay. So I welcome the keynote speaker, Raju J. Das, Professor Raju J. Das, and the discussants, Dr. Vijay Prasad and Professor Venkatesh Atreya, and all the participants to this meeting. Today's topic, as you all know, is Communist Manifesto for the 21st Century Generation. So this is an apt topic. ఇక్కడ ప్రధానంగా ఈ కార్యక్రమం తెలుగు పాఠకులకు కాబట్టి, తెలుగు ఆడియన్స్ కాబట్టి, ఈరోజు ఎంచుకున్న అంశం రెడ్ బుక్ డే సందర్భంగా మేనిఫెస్టో గురించి. మేనిఫెస్టో దాని హిస్టారికల్ కాంటెక్స్ట్ కంటే కూడా ఈ రోజు మనం మేనిఫెస్టో కొన్న అన్వయింపు ఏంటి, వాట్ ఈస్ ది కాంటెంపరీ సిగ్నిఫికెన్స్ అండ్ రెలవెన్స్ ఆఫ్ మేనిఫెస్టో is what we need to know and discuss. So this topic addresses that need. So I brief my views. I will state briefly. Manifesto is perhaps one of the great historical political documents of history, along with the Magna Carta and the Declaration of Rights of French Revolution and American Revolution, and the Universal Declaration of Rights of the UNO. So it has that present August company. But manifesto is perhaps a combination of theory of history, political program, and vision of social transformation like no other document, in a very concise and a very effective manner. Manifesto directly descends within Marxist tradition, in my view, from the economic philosophy manifesto of 1844, where Marx dealt with the notion of alienation, which in manifesto he uses, except that word, the same language, the same idea in describing the workers' condition in a factory system. And also manifesto derives directly from German ideology in terms of the historic materialist notion of the productive forces being hampered by the production relations within the bourgeois system. And as Eric Hobsbawm and Ajaz Ahmad pointed out already, manifesto describes, is based on the logical structure of capitalism. So the globalization which we see very well described in the manifesto actually realized now. At that time, the possibilities envisaged in manifesto were not yet, were in a very rudimentary and infancy stage. And but Marx and Engels could see the possibilities of the system as the method of historical method of Marx and Engels enabled them to see the possibilities within that budding capitalism and where it would go and what it would achieve. And the results of globalization they envisaged there are now before us in empirical and very stark terms. And Ajaz Ahmad also pointed out that it is a philosophical text also. So in that sense, it is a text of combining history, politics, economics, and philosophy. And with this brief introduction of my views on the manifesto, I feel that manifesto, instead of taking it as a sacrosanct or infallible, we have to situate manifesto in 21st century context and see its relevance, and wherever it needs reinterpretation or modification. So I hope that discussion takes place in that spirit. And I invite the keynote speaker, Raju J. Das, to give his lecture as part of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Viraya, for asking me to speak. Thank you, Professor Atreya. Sorry, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Right. So Yeah, so thank you, Professor Rao. Thank you, Professor Atreya. Thank you, Bijay and Paul, for joining in. And okay, so let's get started. I actually wrote a very long piece on the manifesto for World Review of Political Economy, which is published in Beijing. I think it's by the Chinese Academy of Marxism. So what I'm going to say is just a few paragraphs from that very long piece. So can you see the slide and hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Well, Marx and Engels' Communist Manifesto was published in London on this day in 1848. So today is the anniversary. It is truly a part of what Marx called in the manifesto global literature. He actually used that word, global literature. He says that arises within capitalism or in capitalist society from the numerous national and local literatures. And Vijay perhaps can tell you all about that idea because he's heavily involved internationally in the production and contributing to the development of world literature within Marxism. So globally, the popularity of Marxism, interestingly, has been on the rise. So I did a Google Ngram thing, and you look at this. This is stunning. This is stunning. If you look at the article I wrote, I did one for Marxism. The graph for Marxism is a little different than the graph for the Communist Manifesto. Marxism is not rising in popularity, but the manifesto is. So you can have your own interpretation of that. But why is this happening? Well, this should not be surprising, given that a large number of people all over the world, they are actually increasingly in support of socialism or some kind of socialism, and they are increasingly very critical of capitalism. Look at this. So there is a survey, according to a poll in 28 countries, including India, France, China, etc. On your left, you can see on an average, 56% agree that capitalism as it exists today does more harm than good in the world. Look at this. India, 74%. I could not believe that. What is the right doing? According to a poll in Canada, where I've spent how many years now, in fall 2022, 42% of Canadians believe some form of socialism is the ideal economic system. And among the younger people, 18 to 24 years, the percentage is 50. And again, on your right, you will see how Canada, US, Australia, United Kingdom, among the younger people, more than 50% clearly they want some kind of socialism, right? So support for socialism has created indeed, maybe I should show you a little more. In the imperialist heartland, look at this. Socialism as popular as capitalism among young adults in the US. Almost half, almost half. Look at the millennials. So anyway, something is happening. Therefore, in last year, this time, what happened in the US Congress? They had to formally denounce socialism through emotion. They passed would you believe this? The US Congress, the House of Representatives, passed a resolution denouncing socialism. I just could not believe when I heard the news, but look at that. So something is happening. The specter of socialism is back in a big way. So, but then those who favor socialism, they are not yet a majority, but many of us would believe that they are a basis for a movement to win over more people to socialism, or I actually use socialism, communism, and socialist democracy interchangeably, so I don't care if that's not accurate. A socialist movement requires a critical mass of people who possess ideas about how capitalism works and why it is harmful to the majority of society and to nature, and why socialism is the only solution. Many of these ideas are actually present in the Communist Manifesto written by Marx and Engels, primarily Marx, based on some notes that Engels produced. almost 175 years ago. I will only cover the manifesto's sort of more political aspects, discussion on the conditions of the working class and its struggle. A more detailed treatment I've done, as I said, in the longer article published in the World Review of Political Economy. But before I deal with this topic, a little bit of context is necessary on two things. One, on Marx's social theory, which is historical materialism, and Marx's political economy of capitalism. Just a couple of minutes, not to bore you with the details. We all know about this. So a couple of points. Communist Manifesto's historical materialism. Well, Marx makes a few points that society should be seen in terms of classes and not as human beings in general. Classes have antagonistic relations which exist because the class that has control over property in the means of production appropriates surplus product from the class that does not. Antagonistic class relations cause class struggle. Marx says classes always have stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on in an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight. Then he says the outcome of class struggle, however, is not fixed. Those people who say Marxism is teleological are clearly mistaken, because the outcome of class struggle could be a new society, a better society, or the common ruin of classes, or as Rosa Luxemburg said, barbarism. No class society can exist without the public political power, Marx says. That is the state. Political power, properly so called, that is the state, is merely the organized power of one class for oppressing another. The class that controls the means of production more or less controls public political power. Lenin was so much impressed by the manifesto that he said, I'm quoting Lenin, with the clarity and brilliance of genius, this work, that is Communist Manifesto, outlines a new world conception consistent with materialism, unquote. So he was very, very impressed. Now, using materialist dialectics, Marx, of course, made a series of comments on capitalism, and it has been widely discussed how capitalism was a global thing, etc., etc. But very quickly, capitalism... Sorry? Driven by competitive relations, capitalism develops the productive forces and creates a capacity to meet people's needs. The capacity is not realized, but that's a different thing. Relative to pre-capitalist societies, capitalism is actually progress. Lenin even agreed. The need to expand markets and the consequent development of transportation and communication technologies contribute to capitalism's global character. As Professor Rao just mentioned, capitalism was much less global during Marx's time than now. But so in that sense, Manifesto is more true now than it was during Marx's time. Driven by competition, capitalism experiences regular crisis of production, expressed as the epidemic of overproduction. Remember, Marx had not quite written Capital Volume 3, his theory of crisis, but anyway, there is some indication here. Capitalism seeks to resolve its crisis partly by conquering foreign markets, which advanced countries break open by the artillery of their lower prices. Capitalism has caused an agglomeration of production and exchange in a few areas or few countries. It produces, therefore, uneven development between villages and towns, between countries, and between areas within a country. Global capitalism has made less developed countries dependent on more developed ones. I'll come back to imperialism in a minute. By controlling the economy, the capitalist class controls the state. The capitalist state is but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. These are some of the points about capitalism. But now my main topic, the working class. These ideas about capitalism, about historical materialism, etc., inform Marx's discussion of the working class. So, first, the working class is a suffering class. The class suffers because of what could be called primary exploitation, meaning exploitation in the workplace. We all know about this, so I'm not going to bore you with the details. And then what could be called secondary exploitation, which is the exploitation outside the workplace. So listen to what Marx had to say about this. Workers are subjected to what could be called secondary exploitation, which occurs outside the workplace, as soon as people are exploited by this is a quote, as soon as people are exploited by the manufacturer, as soon as people exploited by the manufacturer receive their wages, they are, quote, set upon by the other portions of the bourgeoisie, that is the landlord, the shopkeeper, the pawnbroker, etc., etc. So here is Marx. Anybody who says, "Oh, Marx was all about work, the workplace, factory, etc." No, they are mistaken. Anyway, so there are many ways in which Marx talks about how exploitation happens, etc. But so I'm skipping that section because I want to focus on the politics. Now, of course, the proletariat is not just a suffering class; it is a fighting class. Marx says, quote, "With its birth begins its struggle with the bourgeoisie," unquote. "With the progress of capitalist development, workers begin to form combinations, that is, trade unions, against the bourgeoisie. They club together in order to keep up the rate of wages," unquote, right? So it's a fighting class. Now, there are factors that undermine workers' organization, and there are factors that promote workers' struggle, and there are factors that weaken workers' struggle. The factors that promote workers' struggle, geographical isolation is one, competition among workers, creating splits among the working class, that's one, etc., etc. So there are various factors that are very important now. With the development of capitalist industry, the proletariat increasing in numbers becomes, of course, this is promoting. Sorry, no, I confused you. First, factors that promote working class struggle. When proletariat increases in numbers, they become concentrated in great masses, so its strength grows and it feels that strength more. Workers' unity is also helped on by the improved means of communication that are created by capitalism in its interest, which place the workers of different localities in contact with one another. This process helps to centralize numerous local struggles into one national struggle between classes. Thus, collision between individual workers and individual bourgeois employers take more and more the character of collisions between two classes. But of course, there are factors that weaken worker struggle, and we know that in isolation, competition, etc., etc. Anyway, so these struggles, they produce some concessions. It compels legislative recognition of particular interests of the workers. However, workers enjoy their victory only for a time, that is temporarily. Marx says the real fruit of their battles lies not in terms of immediate results, but in their ever expanding union. So worker struggle, we should not see it in terms of economic result, because the result is political. Because ultimately the aim of the struggle is revolution against with slavery itself. So we should see the worker struggle, even if they don't gain anything economically, it serves a political purpose. Okay, so from economic class struggle to revolution. In all class societies, oppressed classes have engaged in class struggle, but the proletarian struggle is a little different. Look, if you cannot break up a big factory or big enterprise into little things and take your own share. Merely through economic struggle, workers' economic conditions cannot be improved durably and significantly under capitalist property relations. The proletarians have no property. They have nothing of their own to secure and to fortify. Their mission is to destroy all previous securities for and insurances of individual property, unquote. Their ability to work is the only thing that they have, which is no use unless it is combined with the means of production, but they don't have it. So, the proletarians cannot become masters of the productive forces in a future society, except by abolishing their own previous mode of appropriation and thereby also every other previous mode of appropriation. The bourgeoisie is increasingly unfit, Marx says. The bourgeoisie is increasingly unfit to be the ruling class. Why? Because it is incompetent to assure an existence to its slave within his slavery. because it cannot help letting the proletariat sink into such a state. Society can no longer live under this bourgeoisie. In other words, its existence is no longer compatible with society, unquote. Thus, the bourgeoisie produces its own grave diggers. Communism can be achieved, Marx says, by revolution only, the most advanced stage of or form of class struggle. The communists, Marx says, quote, the communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communistic revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. I mean, these are stunning lines. Proletarian, but then what kind of society are we fighting for? Are the proletariat fighting for? Okay. The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, because capitalism is already dispossessing the small-scale producers, whether in the form of Adani taking over people's land or whatever it is. But the abolition of bourgeois property, which is the final and most complete expression of the system of producing and appropriating products, that is based on class antagonisms, on the exploitation of the many by the few. In a dialectical language, Marx says that communism wishes, quote, to do away with a form of property, the necessary condition for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society, unquote. In bourgeois society, living labor is but a means to increase accumulated labor, which takes the form of capitalist wealth. I mean, I hate it when Modi says, oh, these are capitalists are wealth producers. What wealth producers? It is the wealth of common people. In communism, in contrast, accumulated labor will be but a means to widen, to enrich, to promote the existence of the laborer. Communism will not deprive people of the power to appropriate the products of society, but it will deprive people of the power to subjugate the labor of others by means of such appropriations. Communism will replace the old bourgeois society with its classes and class antagonisms, with an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. So communism is also a society. This is very interesting in today's context. Communism is also a society where there is no class exploitation, nor is there any national oppression. You know, there are people in the West who think imperialism is not very relevant, etc., etc. What nonsense. Anyway, so listen to Marx. In proportion as the exploitation of one individual by another will also be put an end to, the exploitation of one nation by another nation will also be put an end to. In proportion as the antagonism between classes within the nation vanishes, the hostility of one nation to another will come to an end, unquote. Okay. But revolution is not a one-time thing. It's a process. It happens through stages. Well, stages. I don't mean stages to stages, but it happens over time. Communist revolution as a process involves fighting for reforms. You know, otherwise, I don't like the political indifferentism and ultra-sectarian, ultra-leftism, or reforms, whatever. Anyway, so communist revolution is a process. It involves fighting for reforms. But communists reject reformist approaches according to which capitalism can be regulated to redress social grievances. Material conditions of existence can be changed by administrative or governmental reforms without the revolutionary abolition of the bourgeois relations of production. Small-scale production, commercially based, can be promoted to solve society's problems, and all political and especially all revolutionary action should be rejected, and people's conditions can be improved by peaceful means. These are the reformist things that Marx rejects. Communists do fight and must fight, Marx says, for reforms within capitalism. Read an article he wrote a long time after. It's called Political Indifferentism. Then you'll know what he is hinting at here in the manifesto. The communists fight for the attainment of the immediate aims, for the enforcement of the momentary interests of the working class. Their approach is not reformist, however, because in the movement of the present, they also represent and take care of the future of that movement. In all these movements, they bring to the front as the leading question in each, the property question, unquote. Okay? So, not reformism. Reforms, yes, not reformism. Communists do not pursue reforms merely in the economic conditions. The reforms that in no respect affect the relations between capital and labor. The aim of the communist class struggle is the overthrow of the bourgeois supremacy, conquest of political power by the proletariat, and the establishment of a proletarian state. Indeed, the first step in the quote, indeed, the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of the ruling class, to win what Marx calls the battle of democracy, unquote. In the preface to the 1872 German edition, Marx and Engels write the following after their careful reflection on the experience of the Paris Commune. Quote, the working class cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made state machinery and wield it for its own purposes, unquote. The capitalist state cannot wither away. I hear some people saying, oh, this capitalist state will slowly wither away. What nonsense. The capitalist state, at least all of its anti-workers or anti-people apparatuses, have to be smashed by common people. This is the point that Lenin asserted in his State and Revolution. Marx says, since the proletariat must first of all acquire political supremacy, must rise to be the leading class of the nation, must constitute itself the nation, it is so far itself national, though not in the bourgeois sense of the word. Though not in substance, therefore, yet in form, the struggle of the proletariat with the bourgeoisie is at first a national struggle. The proletariat of each country must first of all settle matters with its own bourgeoisie. But ultimately, of course, communist struggle is international or global in scope as the capitalism system itself. In some cases, communists have to fight along with, okay, this is important. In some cases, communists have to fight along with less revolutionary forces, let's say social democratic forces. But if they do, the communists never cease for a single instant to instill into the working class the clearest possible recognition of the hostile antagonism between bourgeoisie and the proletariat, unquote. Communists, Marx says, have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole, nor do they set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape and mold the proletarian movement, unquote. In the national struggle of the proletarians of the different countries, communists bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat, independently of nationality, unquote. So on taking power, the proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest by degrees all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state initially. It will make despotic inroads on the rights of property and on the conditions of bourgeois production, and it will take a series of measures, which I'm not going to go into. We all know about the measures Marx suggested, including abolition of child labor, looking after the land, etc., etc. And many of these measures actually apply to the global south. So I'll be concluding in a few minutes. Then who will bail the capitalist cat? The question of key revolutionary agent. While the proletariat's interest is in the communist revolution, who will indeed bring about such a revolution? The proletariat is not the only suffering class. Many other classes and groups suffer. Could another class or strata bring about such a revolution? No, Marx says. Can the peasantry lead communist revolution? No, Marx says. No proletarian suffering masses cannot, no. Non-proletarian suffering masses cannot be truly revolutionary. So here is Marx. The lower middle class, the small manufacturer, the shopkeeper, the artisan, the peasant, all these fight against the bourgeoisie to save from extinction their existence as fractions of the middle class. They are therefore not revolutionary. If by chance they are revolutionary, they are only so in view of their impending transfer into the proletariat, unquote. Okay. So of all the classes, therefore, that stand face to face with the bourgeoisie today, the proletariat alone is a really revolutionary class. If the condition for capital is the wage labor, that is, if wage labor is the source of capitalist wealth, then this class can only stop the production of the wealth. This ability to change capitalism is helped by the fact that the proletarians are the majority in most of the large countries. This lends a unique character to the proletarian movement against capitalism. Listen to Marx. Marx says, all previous historical movements were movements of minorities or in the interest of minorities. The proletarian movement is the self-conscious, independent movement of the immense majority in the interest of the immense majority, unquote. So, my conclusion. The intellectual and political lessons of Manifesto for the 21st century generation, including especially the students and the youth, are clear. So I will recap. What are these lessons? The first of all, a new world outlook. Manifesto social theory or historical materialism is an application of materialist dialectics. This is indicated by Engels, who says in his 1883 preface to the German edition of the Manifesto the following: the basic thought running through the Manifesto, that is, that economic production and the structure of society of every historical epoch necessarily arising therefrom constitute the foundation for the political and intellectual history of that epoch. That consequently, ever since the dissolution of the communal ownership of land, all history has been a history of class struggles, of struggles between the exploited and exploiting, between dominated and dominating classes. This is Marx's historical materialism. Of course, Leon Trotsky says the following: the materialist conception of history discovered by Marx only a short while before and applied with consummate skill in the Manifesto has completely withstood this test of events and the blows of hostile criticism. All other interpretations of the historical process have lost all scientific meaning. We can state with certainty that it is impossible in our time to be not only a revolutionary militant, but even a literate observer in politics without assimilating the materialist interpretation of history that has informed Manifesto. That's very important. Now, today's world. We live now in a time, a post-truth time. I just published a book from Brill last year on this topic, The Politics of Love and Lying or some such thing. Anyway, we actually live in a world where we have given up on love and we have given up on truth. Anyway, so we live in a time of post-truth time where under the right-wing attacks on rational thought, some people are giving up on ideas that are based in reason and evidence. Or some people, postmodernists, for example, in academia, seek to explain the world purely in terms of ideas. Materialist conception of history in the Manifesto is the best antidote to these reactionary tendencies. Marx is critical of all those who talk about human beings in general. He rejects the idea that it is possible to appeal to society at large without the distinction of class. Well, so he would reject the idea of climate change, for example, as having been caused by humanity as a whole, and that climate change mitigation must be on everyone's shoulders. No, he would actually say that climate change is mainly due to the big business class of imperialist nations, and they must be primarily responsible for its mitigation. He would reject, in fact, any explanation of social problems in terms of human nature, human greed, and all that nonsense. Manifesto takes a class approach. Society should be... Sorry, I can't hear. Sorry, was talking some... Okay. Manifesto takes a class approach. Society should be seen in terms of the exploiting and exploited classes. It would therefore reject an identity politics view of society so dominant in academia and media, where the main division in society is thought to be not between the classes, but between castes and races and religious groups, etc., etc. Marx's emphasis on class struggle also counters tendencies in academia and labor movement that seek to revise Marxism in the spirit of class collaboration. In relation to major global issues such as climate change again, or rise of fascistic forces, whether in India or the US, etc., many advocate what would be a popular front approach, where the exploited masses are supposed to be in an alliance with the progressive sections of the capitalist class to fight these problems. The manifesto would insist, on the contrary, on a class struggle approach. That is, the working class must mobilize itself independently of all fractions of the bourgeoisie, democratic or not, green or not, imperialist or not, conciliatory or not, lesser evil or not, to fight against these problems. Of course, in an alliance with the peasantry, small-scale producers, on which I just finished a piece. Working class peasantry alliance is extremely important. Marx didn't deal with that. Okay. Now, Vijay mentioned, I think, Aziz Ahmad, so this is very interesting. Marx says, it's really interesting. Marx says, according to, he says some elements of the exploited classes, for example, lumpen elements, can be, quote, a bribed tool of reactionary intrigue, unquote, that is, of the capitalist class. Well, if Marx was alive today, he would say how these lumpen elements, apart from the petty bourgeoisie, serve the fascistic agenda of the capitalist class, including especially in India. According to Aziz Ahmad, I actually deal with this in the book from Brill on India 2 years ago in some details. According to Aziz Ahmad, a demoralized lumpen proletarian's lack of their productivity, their participation in any sort of regular production process, their lack of sense of who they are, robs them of any pride. And therefore, that pride must somehow be regained, even if it is by harming others, be it by way of crime or by that purported non-crime that is called communalism in India, which is another name for religious sectarianism itself, with all its violences. Okay, so indeed, in the new India, many of the lumpen elements serve as moral police that reinforce conservative values in terms of who can love whom, what you can eat, etc. The lumpen elements also serve as informal police with the fascistic agenda of humiliating minorities, hurting minorities, and serving as foot soldiers of right-wing, pro-corporate, and majoritarian governments such as the one in India now. The right-wing parrots nation and national, etc. Let it tremble at Marx's view of the nation. This is what Marx said. Since the proletariat must rise to the leading class of the nation, must constitute itself the nation, it is so far itself national, but not in the bourgeois sense of the word. Of course, on the other hand, it is also true that the working people have no country, no fatherland or motherland, which means that they must not support the capitalist class of their country against the capitalist class of another country in any predatory war. Okay, so I'll be finishing in about 5 minutes. Okay, left unity. In some cases, Marx says that the communists may have to fight along with the revolutionary forces. But if they do, they never cease to instill into the working class the clearest possible recognition of the hostile antagonism between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. So while communists are the most radical, they must reject sectarianism. That's what Marx is saying. This advice is prescient given the extreme disunity among Marxists and communists in the world today. Communists, Marx says, have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole, nor do they set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape the movement. Marx would reject the approach of many communist groups who look at the world from the standpoint of their own little political programs. Okay. Marx is the 20th century Lenin, or perhaps 21st century Lenin. Okay, so what do I mean by that? In emphasizing class struggle, Marx is a true Marxist. as Lenin defined a Marxist. Okay, what is Lenin's definition of Marxism? Comrades, here it is. Only he is a Marxist or she is a Marxist who extends the recognition of the class struggle to the recognition of the dictatorship of the proletariat, that is, political hegemony of the proletariat. That is what constitutes the most profound distinction between the Marxist and the ordinary petty as well as big bourgeois. This is the touchstone on which the real understanding and recognition of Marxism should be tested, unquote, Lenin. Marx not only emphasizes class struggle, but the highest form of class struggle, that is revolution and consequent conquest of state power. Okay, Marx actually would not be a Marxist if academic Marxism is real Marxism. The idea of revolution, which is a constant in Marx's later writings as well as the Manifesto, goes right against the reformist ideas of academic Marxism. Consider David Harvey as one of those academic Marxists. I actually respect David Harvey, but some of his ideas are just blatant reformist. Just listen to this. The kind of, David Harvey says, the kind of fantasy that you might have heard socialists or communists and so on might have heard back in 1850, he could have said 1848, which is that, well, okay, we can destroy this capitalist system and we can build something entirely different. That is an impossibility right now, David Harvey says. That is an impossibility right now. He's not only an imperialism denier, he's also a revolution denier. Should you be surprised? We have to, David Harvey says, we have to keep the circulation of capital in motion. We have to keep things moving, because if we don't do that, we are actually stuck with a situation in which, as I have said, almost all of us would starve. For Harvey, capital's call to the barricades of revolution is merely, quote, the rhetoric of the Communist Manifesto. If this sort of stuff is Marxism, and if Marx was alive, he would say, I'm not a Marxist. In emphasizing class struggle, Marx is absolutely clear about the dominant role of the proletariat. This, once again, is in contrast to many academic Marxists, including David Harvey once again, who do not accept the leadership of the proletariat in the fight against capitalism. Harvey argues for, quote, a broader notion of an alliance of forces in which the conventional proletariat is an important element, but not necessarily a leadership role, unquote. Communist Manifesto is a missile hurled at the reformist ideas such as this that originate in academia. Marx insists that the main agent to fight for communism is the proletariat. There can be no substitute for it. And it is the proletariat as such, and not this or that section of the proletariat that some modern-day Marxists talk about. Third world proletariat, black proletariat, maybe Dalit proletariat, I don't know, environmental proletariat, we hear about, precarious proletariat, and all that stuff. Marx is not a trade unionist Marxist. Many academics and trade union leaders are always eager to emphasize agency in the form of trade union struggle. For Marx, however, every class struggle is a political struggle. The organization of the proletariat as a class is consequently its organization into a political party. Mere trade union action will not lead to socialism. Trade unionists and anarcho-syndicalists forget this. Marx anticipates Lenin's distinction between trade unionist politics or bourgeois politics of the working class on the one hand and class struggle proper. The manifesto says that communists openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. This means that the proletariat cannot conquer power within the legal framework only established by the bourgeoisie, nor by slowly transforming the capitalist state into a socialist state, nor by trade union action, nor by appealing to the judiciary, etc., etc. This is the case whether or not there is liberal democracy, whether or not the communist movement is strong or weak, etc. The bourgeoisie will simply not give up power peacefully. Although Marx says, like Lenin, one should make use of all sorts of methods, legal, illegal, and so on. Marx against 1917. So I'll finish in about maybe 2 minutes. The manifesto is a call for revolution against capitalism. But given the experience of the socialist revolution in 1917, many have raised doubts about Marx's theory of revolution. For some, the failure of the 1917 proves Marx correct, and therefore Bolsheviks were actually not right. Consider Ellen Marxist-Wood, formerly from my own institution. I have a lot of respect for Ellen Wood's work, but I disagree with her here. Ellen Wood says, quote, "We should not underestimate the significance of Marx's assumption that a socialist revolution would be most likely to succeed in the context of a more advanced capitalism. In that sense, it could be argued that the ultimate failure of the socialist Russian Revolution, which occurred in the absence of those preconditions, fulfilled his predictions all too well," unquote. Well, so implicitly then, 1917 had to fail. Implicitly then, Lenin was wrong to call for a revolution. I disagree. The correlation between social relations and productive forces is not a matter of national scale, as Leon Trotsky and Lenin would explain to you. The failure of 1917 is primarily because of the failure of the revolution in advanced countries and consequent strangulation of the 1917 revolution through military threats and from imperialist powers and through the capitalist law of value. The 1917 experience has taught us that communism cannot be established in a single country, poor or rich, given the global character of the capitalist production, exchange, and finance. This was Lenin's point and Leon Trotsky's point. Trotsky says the Bonapartist degeneration of the Soviet state is an overwhelming illustration of the falseness of the theory of socialism in one country, unquote. Okay, my final point is about the South. Okay, my real final point. Manifesto. I wish Marx paid more attention to the Global South. The manifesto is relatively deficient with respect to what is now called the Global South, and yet its methodology can allow us to extend its lessons to the South. First of all, Marx's point that the bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, etc., does not quite apply to large swaths of the South, where labor productivity is extremely low and where antediluvian and social relations of formal or hybrid subsumption of labor and not social relations of advanced capitalist production backed by systemic tendency towards technical change tend to be extremely strong. How do we explain underdevelopment? Well, the key is, at least partly, in Marx's point that capitalism has made less developed nations dependent on the more developed ones. Nations of peasants on nations of bourgeoisie, the East on the West. Secondly, as Trotsky rightly complains, the manifesto contains no reference to the struggle of colonial and semi-colonial countries for independence. The colonial question was resolved automatically for them, not in consequence of an independent movement of oppressed nationalities, but in consequence of the victory of the proletariat in the metropolitan centers of capitalism. Today, we must understand that the South continues to exist under imperialist domination, contrary to imperialism denial in the West in certain circles, if not under formal colonialism. This is true even if the native capitalist class has become much more powerful since decolonization. The importance of anti-imperialist struggle to be led by the proletariat leaning on the peasantry cannot be overemphasized. Marx's manifesto would not disagree. While advocating the abolition of property in land and emphasizing the key role of the proletariat as the revolutionary agent, Marx does not deal with the specificity of the Global South either, where many property owners appropriate surplus in ways that are not exactly capitalist. In this context, the land question, the agrarian revolution question, is very important. Marx does not quite deal with it, quite. In the South, given the bourgeoisie is linked to the landlord class, and given that, as many people have said, it is scared, the bourgeoisie is scared to death that any struggle against the non-capitalist exploiters might spill over to be an anti-capitalist struggle. The bourgeoisie will not support any struggle to eliminate the feudal remnants. So the land question and any pre-capitalist sources of oppression can be eliminated only by a proletarian government that comes on the back of the communist revolution. This was Leon Trotsky's point. Agrarian revolution is only possible under proletarian rule. Nambudripad actually said this, that the bourgeoisie is dead scared of the fight against the landlords. Similarly, the ongoing fascistic attacks on democracy and secularism, the attack that politically serve the capitalist class, can only be successfully fought by the proletariat leaning on small-scale producers as a part of the fight for socialist democracy. As well, the endless predatory wars and proxy wars and genocide, etc., supported or prompted by the imperialist powers, as well as the damaging impacts of international institutions such as the World Bank and IMF, etc., in the South, can only be countered by the proletariat, supported by the peasantry. Hence, the importance of worker-peasant alliance. That's another big topic. So let me conclude finally. Okay. The capitalist class, to conclude, the capitalist class is unfit to rule. Capitalism must go. There is no alternative to socialism. If capitalist system does not go, there is a real possibility of social ecological barbarism or the common ruin of all the classes. Capitalism will go only when it is overthrown by the proletariat. There is no other way. Not the DSA way, for example. The proletariat is the only force that can overthrow capitalism by leading the small-scale producers and oppressed masses. No other class can do that job. The proletarian revolutionary struggle must include the struggle for reforms as a part of revolutionary struggle for socialism. As Lenin said, reforms, big reforms come only as a byproduct of revolutionary struggle. Socialism or communism is more than egalitarianism or a few pro-worker policies. The fight for socialism requires more than the fight for reforms. It requires a disciplined, organized political party of the proletariat that is class conscious. The manifesto, properly understood, slightly amended, can play a key role in promoting proletarian class consciousness that is needed for socialism. The manifesto is a key tool in building a movement for global socialist democracy, a society of free association of direct producers, as Marx calls it, a society where there is democracy in every sphere of life, and a society which is ecologically sane. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Can I continue?
Yes, please.
Professor Raju J. Das has given a comprehensive and updated lecture on the relevance of Communist Manifesto for the present times, and has also ventured into several contemporary problems worldwide under developed capitalism or developing capitalism like India and mainly India. But I feel that the discussants might apply the experience of 20th century social, though Professor Das has also touched upon it, the reasons for the degeneration of Soviet revolution by 1991. The emphasis on external factors only may not help us to see the internal problems of socialism in understanding. So he also was very clear about the non-possibility of socialism in one country, but still the international socialism in the present world seems, for me at least, a remote possibility, and the revolutionary character of proletarians, which he repeatedly emphasized, is also seen differently by maybe academic Marxists, I don't deny. but academic Marxists need not be totally ruled out. Their insights can be taken. For example, there is a small example here. Viv Chhabbar, the former editor of Social Register, gave 2 lectures in 2016 in Vijayawada and Guntur, and he was saying that the present-day capitalism, the so-called deep state, appears so gigantic and so huge to the working class of the developed capitalism. They are just hesitant to venture mount a big struggle against them, and they have stakes within capitalism. That is what he's reading. I don't want anybody to agree or they disagree also with that. So with these few comments of mine, I request Professor Venkatesh Atreya to reflect on the points raised by Raju Chetas.
Yeah, am I visible? Am I audible?
Yes.
Am I visible?
No.
No? How do I become?
No, Venkatesh, we can see your ceiling fan, Venkatesh.
Not you. Ceiling fan, how nice. It is a very nice object.
I know you are not a ceiling fan, so I'm concerned about that.
No, but I know I wouldn't be here without a ceiling fan. So
you have to come down about 25 degrees more.
I have no idea how this gets done because my other regular laptop isn't working.
No. You're now about 15 degrees off.
Okay.
You're going in the right direction.
You can take it as a audio presentation instead. I can't even locate these controls on this new system because I use a laptop and this is a desktop. And because my laptop wasn't working, I had to move here. And the arrangement
better to go audio then. Yeah.
Yeah, you can try. It doesn't matter really. I mean, I know you'll be seeing me, but what can be done? No, I don't want to respond necessarily to what has been said, partly because the communication facility wasn't exactly perfect for me, so I missed out parts of what Professor Raju Das may have said. But what I do want to say is, I took a session for my students at the Asian College of Journalism on the Manifesto this morning. And it was a great experience because these kids come from very different backgrounds. They're going to be journalists tomorrow, and they're not particularly interested in communist ideology. But the sheer power of the text managed to draw them into the discussion. And many of them, said later to me that this is very inspiring for them. That is the power of the manifesto as a document. Remember, it's only a pamphlet. We keep blaming it for all the things it is not. It is not a scholarly text. It is not meant to be a treatise. It's a brilliant polemical pamphlet with a lot of content. And it's amazing in its anticipatory power of how capitalism would unfold. Also, by the way, it is not, this is before Capital was written. So the deeper analysis you really get in Capital, but what you get in the manifesto is quite adequate and quite inspiring as a call to action, and as a document that shows the pathway as well. It gives you proper reasoning. But the other point I want to make is, I don't want to invoke leading figures where it is a Trotsky or Stalin. That's not, going to be particularly useful to us in this context. More important for me is today in the current extremely right-wing world, which is what our professor was trying to tell us, the very right-wing world. How are you guys talking about socialism and all that? I think in the extremely right-wing world, we need a restatement in the contemporary language and idiom, and taking into account the contemporary global context of the manifesto or a manifesto-like proposition. I also don't agree that it's correct to say the working class must lead. I have no disagreement with that. But some tendencies in Marxism have tended to relegate the peasantry to a secondary role. Our own experience, for example, in India the last 2 years, has been this very heroic struggle led by the peasantry, but backed by the working class. So the idea of the worker-peasant alliance, of course, this is not a revolution, obviously. This is a fight against a horrifying set of laws passed by a government, but they were able to throw those laws into the dustbin. And no academic predicted that. All due respect to Professor Jagannath Rao, I must say, none of the academics had the guts to say this will win. They all thought Mr. Modi is so, impossible to defeat. I think the power of a worker-peasant alliance, in a small way, on a global scale, I think came through for many of us who were in the struggle, because I'm not just an academic, I'm also an activist in the Kisan Sabha. I won't claim that we knew that we were going to win, okay, at the beginning. We were not, to be honest. But this is a daunting struggle. But with the working class coming into it, it made it much better for us to push. So, in a sense, I take the point from Professor Das that the working class has played a key role, but I don't want to take a kind of a nihilist position on the peasantry. See, one of the weaknesses of some segments of Marxism, some schools of Marxism, has been a tendency to kind of look down upon the peasantry and the rural economy and polity and society for possibly good reasons in specific contexts. But the way I look at it, Marx was always trying to avoid the distinction between town and country in the ultimate vision of socialism. And I think what the socialist movement has to do is to try and bring together working people, both rural and urban, under the leadership of the working class, of course. But the working class is not going to be identical across countries because levels of development are different. Growth of productive forces is rather different in different countries. So we can't forget the national context. In fact, this is what the manifesto says. The manifesto says, yes, give you a manifesto, but the tactics will differ depending on the place you're talking about and the context in which you're talking about it and the stage of development. So for a country like India, the peasantry would be an extremely important part of the revolution. In our understanding of the Indian state, it's a bourgeois landlord state, led by the big bourgeoisie. We don't believe that we can just bypass the peasantry and make a revolution in this country. We don't say also that we can romanticize the peasantry, okay? We do recognize the limitations of a self-employed petty bourgeois class, which is what peasantry ultimately is. Nonetheless, there is a great deal of potential for revolutionary activity among the peasantry of a backward economy, constantly exploited by imperialism and by the domestic big business classes and the domestic landlords. And in fact, one of the tragedies of India is that we have not been able to carry out comprehensive land reforms across the country. This is one of our major failures that left in this country. We have tried, we succeeded in some places, but to me, the working class would no doubt be the leader, but the peasantry would be a very important detachment of the army of the revolution. So it's important. Sometimes, Trotsky and his followers tend to not place enough emphasis on the potentially revolutionary role of the peasantry, but I don't want to get into the argument about Trotsky or Stalin or X or Y or Z. I must put on, record the reservation that I have. But having done that, I'm going to proceed with what we think we need to do. Problem we have is that we have an extremely right-wing world. And it's not right-wing just in the economic policy sense. It's right-wing not just in the democracy sense of the word. It's right-wing communal. Right-wing, if you come to India, it's right-wing caste, right-wing communal, Islamophobia, you have it. Everything is there. So, this requires a far more carefully worked out strategy of overcoming these odds. And those strategies will not be uniform across the country. They will differ from state to state. I'm more focused in India. I'm not going to talk about the world revolution. That's not my remit anyway today. I do think, I'm nearing the end of my life, but I'm very confident the communist revolution will come. I have no doubt about it. And I don't think the Russian Revolution is a failure. People keep saying the failure of the Russian Revolution. What failure? It lasted 74 years in the face of a massive imperialist offensive across the world. And it delivered what capitalism could not deliver. Don't forget, I'm an economist, and the revolution occurred. Economists said, how can this be? How can they run a state without capitalists? Well, we showed them. You can run a state without capitalists perfectly well. That is a huge contribution to the Russian Revolution that people forget. Academics especially tend to forget. This is a phenomenal contribution. If you look at it in a historical perspective, humanity is very far from the stage of collective conscious governance of itself. So in a situation where that transition to collective conscious self-governance hasn't yet matured, it is very remarkable that the Russian working class would actually lead the entire country in a transformation which, with all its limitations, many of which derive from their errors, but many more of which derive from the role of imperialism across the world. And it's unfortunate that some of the opponents of the revolution ended up being on the side of imperialism, but that's something we can't do much about. That's history, right? It's behind us. But the achievements of the Soviet Revolution as an economist, I would not underestimate them at all. And if you ask any developing country government or even the ruling elite, they intensely feel the absence of the USSR. And they need to negotiate, fight the battles with imperialism and its minions, And I think, therefore, the historical legacy of the Soviet Revolution carried out in an extremely backward country. In the early, just look at the world map in 1970. What was there? All colonies, right? All big imperialist countries. And here comes a shining star, the USSR. Gradually, not overnight, but from 1970 to 23, over that period. Remember, 14 countries invade Red Russia. The White Army gets defeated because of the Red Army. The Red Army loses a lot of active cadre in the process. Then you have the 2 years of, after the 2 years of internal civil strife brought about by imperialist intervention, you have the droughts and the problems that came, and a complete boycott, technological, economic boycott of the USSR by the imperialist countries, putting every hurdle in their way. In fact, encouraging Hitler against them, encouraging fascism against them. These are the odds that the Soviet party and the Soviet country overcame under their collective leadership. And I'm not here to either blame or praise a particular leader in that collective, but I'm saying that collective certainly played an extremely important role in fending off imperialism, and not only that, in defeating fascism and delivering democracy to the world. I mean, the champions of democracy that we hear about from the US, it's laughable. Their entire record is one of destroying democracy. The Soviet record is one of fighting for democracy. And I think these are important achievements of the USSR. We may be unhappy with the way many things were handled. We may be unhappy with negative consequences to human rights of various kinds. Yes, I think those are lessons we learned. We learned it in relation to China as well. But at the end of the day, in a long-term historical perspective, revolutions don't happen overnight. Nor are they consolidated within a few months. They take decades. There are setbacks, there are reversals, there are restorations. The problem with modern revisionism was that it thought that the socialist solution is irreversible. It was very complacent. It lacked the need to guard against imperialist conspiracies. I mean, Gorbachev ended up talking about universal human values. That is the height of absurdity. What universal human values in a world dominated by capitalism? He thought that NATO wouldn't expand to the east. I mean, you have to be kidding me. Gorbachev really thought that NATO wouldn't expand to the east. So you are facing a brutal enemy, which has had a sordid record of colonial oppression, racist oppression, and global aggression. And that's what the Soviet Union was up against. That's what China was up against. It's unfortunate that there was a conflict between USSR and China. That is something that we would have been better off without. But having said that, all these fledgling socialist countries, which are transiting from an extremely backward economic and social structure, did remarkably well in a fairly short period of time. I think that's something that we should not abandon in the face of the attacks and the enemies. I want to restate that quite confidently, because I think it'll happen all over again. What is the record of capitalism? People talk about socialist failure. What has been the record of capitalism? You tell me, which capitalist country has had 2 or 3 or 4 decades of uninterrupted growth that has benefited various sections of the population? Hasn't. You can't find a single country. Maybe you find a small island somewhere completely funded by the US. Of course, you have the terrible example of Israel, which is the other side of the story. But seriously, I think socialists have much to be proud of. Socialism has much to offer to humankind. And the fact that the first experiments in extremely hostile conditions didn't succeed, whether it was the Paris Commune or the 1917 Soviet Revolution or subsequent revolutions in Eastern Europe and so on, which had more limited chances of success once a world led by US imperialism had emerged and NATO was in the ascendant. I think all these are experiences to be treasured and to be inspired by, while of course being very critical of the massive errors that were made in the course of building these societies. Today, I think globally, we are facing a big right-wing upsurge, not first ultra-neoliberalism, but also, as I said, various other aspects of society are also being have moved to the right. So the first task before all of us is to try and push the world back away from the right-wing dominance. It can't be done without, of course, massive class and mass struggles, but we have a clear focus. We have to work with Democrats, with other people who are not. We can't have a communist manifesto only for the communists. If we can have a communist manifesto for the communists, but we have other manifestos for others, we have to have a much larger program, which can be inclusive, bring others into the picture, and there is plenty of weapons with us. Our ideological weapons are far sharper than those of the bourgeoisie. We don't have the access to communication that they have, but we have far sharper weapons. And I think we should really look at it positively, try and attract the new younger elements in the populations of various countries. But most of all, we should intensify the fight against imperialism, which is what will radicalize people across the world. We should intensify the fight against the dominance of finance capital. And we should not present finance capital as if it is a replacement of productive capital. Capitalism is still productive. It's still allowing the growth of productive forces. I don't buy some of the Western Marxist argument that finance capital domination means no accumulations occurring or accumulations only by disposition. Concrete real accumulations are occurring through the exploitation of working people in the non-capitalist world and in the capitalist world. So we have all the material there for our fight. Nothing has really fundamentally changed in class terms. We have had some very good experiences. We had some very bitter failures, and we need to go forward. Therefore, on this day, when I have reread the manifesto again for the umpteenth time, it's a bit like what we do. I mean, I do it with capital as well. I must, just a matter of personal record, I must say I was a completely non-political kid when I went to the US way back in '69. I graduated from IIT. I was a good boy, high marks, no vision about the future, no idea of Indian society. But I got caught in the anti-war movement, and unfortunately, I read Capital. So that completely changed my life. The Manifesto and Capital are so inspiring as texts. And the amazing thing when you read Capital, I've written about it elsewhere, Vijay also has written about it. He talked about writing Capital, I talked about reading Capital. It's a phenomenal text. It's huge, right? 3 volumes. And yet, it's so readable, so unbelievably readable. The Manifesto is much shorter, but it's also unbelievably readable. So I think we have weapons in our hands, and similarly there must be many texts in many countries. I mean, Ho Chi Minh, there's so much to learn from him. We only talk about Marx and Engels or Lenin at best. And of course, our colleague has talked about Trotsky quite a bit. Although I would put my balances slightly differently in the pantheon of leading revolutionaries over the last several decades. But there are many more in the Third World. We're going to talk about Mao, with all the complexity, with the pluses and minuses of Mao's legacy, and likewise the generations of Vietnamese leadership, or the much vilified North Korean leadership, which has much to be vilified about, but also has the standing up to US imperialism, is something that you can't altogether ignore. People must have a sense of trenchant anti-imperialism, uncompromising anti-imperialism, if you want to take the revolution forward. There's a great deal more to say, but I'm sure people want to say whatever they want to say, and I'm pretty clear in my mind that the laws that Marx laid out, the growth of capitalism and its laws of motion, remain valid. They remain valid simply as reasoning. And Lenin gave us a very important leap forward when from Marx we went to Lenin, recognized the role of monopoly capitalism, the role of imperialism in maintaining colonial superexploitation. But don't forget, Lenin also said, while imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, imperialism is the eve of the proletarian revolution. He didn't simply say it, he did it. He led the revolution a year after he had said this in 1916. People forget these texts, you see. When Lenin wrote this little pamphlet in 1916, he had the courage to say, not just it's the highest stage of capitalism, it's the last stage of capitalism, the eve of proletarian revolution. If you could say it in 1916, we have no business to say the scope of proletarian revolution is over, finished, history has gone back. This is what Fukuyama said. This is what all these guys were saying. Where is the US today? Who is the strongest economy? And it doesn't mean that you necessarily approve of whatever the Chinese state does. That's a different matter altogether. But the forces of socialism are not easily vanquished. So we have a good base from the start. There have been setbacks, but I think the way ahead, and I say this when I'm turning 77, right? The way ahead is going to be fantastic. We're going to keep fight going. The good fight will go on, and we will win. Thank you.
I thank Professor Venkateswaraya for his illuminating lecture. And his call to fight imperialism and finance capital are shared by all left-thinking people. But some analysts are coming up with a reinterpretation of imperialism. The inter-imperialist rivalries are not the same as between First World War and Second World War, and they have balance of forces, whatever you call it. They are able to manage internal contradictions of imperialism and for exploiting the world, developing and undeveloped countries more efficiently. And
if I may intervene, Professor, if I may intervene for a minute, with due respect, yes, you are right that there are periods when inter-imperialist rivalries are muted, but it's going to be a permanent state of affairs. I mean, everything is in motion. That's what
you are right. You are right.
So keep that in mind. Let's not have a static understanding of imperialist contradictions having died down. They haven't died down, but you're right. There have been muting of imperialist rivalries.
You're right. The process, the time unravels everything. We hope that the left will take plunge and the working class will come forward to fight imperialism, and that is our hope. Thank you once again, Professor Venkatesh Satreya. Now we request Dr. Vijay Prashad to share his views.
Firstly, it's always great to have Venkatesh's optimism. I think it's very important to register that. The manifesto is a text I very much love, and at Leftward we published a small version in Hindi, and the Hindi first line is, I think, the best line. The Hindi first line is the best translation of the manifesto. It says, "Ek bhoot Europe ki neend haram kar raha hai," which is really much better than a specter is haunting Europe. This is a ghost, which is, got the double meaning of haram in there against Europe. So anyway, it's a great text, and today is a tremendous day. I first want to talk about what today is, because I think that may not be clear to everybody. About 4 years ago, in the Indian Society of Left Publishers, which includes, Nava Telangana, it includes Prajashakti, Manchi Pustakam, Chinta Publishers, National Book Agency, now Marxbadi Path, Leftward Books, Vam Prakashan, we can add all of us together. About 4 or 5 years ago, we had a meeting, actually 5 years ago, we had a meeting in Delhi, and we said, we're going to consolidate as a platform, and we as left publishers in India are going to do some things together. And one of the ideas coming out of Leftward Books, Vam Prakashan, the Indian Society of Left Publishers, was to recognize publicly the date of the publication of the Communist Manifesto, which had no longer been celebrated in the calendar of the left, which is the 21st of February. It was first published in 1848. And we call that Red Books Day. Red Books Day has been going since 2020, February. Already the reports that are coming in show us that we are well on track to exceed the 1 million people participating. I'm very proud of our Indian left publishers who lead on this, and very proud, for instance, of the tens of thousands of people in Tamil Nadu, the hundreds of thousands in Kerala that are participating. And I want to tell Raju that in Nepal, for instance, in Great Nepal, there are meetings in Jhapa, there are meetings in Kathmandu. The Communist Party, Unified Socialist, Maoist Center, and others have all been participating. There are united efforts to go out. Workers' Party of Bangladesh has had big public meeting on Red Books Day. In fact, our comrades in the Socialist Party of East Timor have had events. Party Socialist in Indonesia, in banned conditions, have conducted an event. Red Ant in Australia. Now the day is widening, moving further, towards the west. We are going to have events in Italy. There will be an event at Inkani Books with Professor Isa Shivji. In Ghana already, Socialist Movement of Ghana will be doing events. We come to Havana, Cuba, where at the Havana Book Fair, there's going to be a whole day for the Red Books Day. In New York City at the People's Forum, they're going to celebrate the life and work of Claudia Jones. And this is going to go all the way out to Santiago, Chile, where in Cafe Beria, there's going to be a public meeting this evening. Red Books Day is an incredible idea. It has caught fire. we are committed in the next few years to go from over 1 million to 10 million participants. And we hope to have the immense majority get involved in Red Books Day. We think this has the capacity of becoming another May Day. It is about the battle of ideas. It is about the battle of emotions. It is about the immensity of the Marxist interpretation of the world and of the communist attempt to transform the world. It celebrates the ideas, but the ideas, of course, rooted in our praxis, in the unity of our theory and practice. So I'm very happy. I wanted to say this, but I don't want to forget. That's why we're here. That's why the Manch has organized the program for today. We are in a process called Red Books Day, which is a broad international process. I'm seeing photographs from Tamil Nadu of our unit committees meeting in various rural areas, the Worker Peasant Alliance sitting and discussing sections of the Communist Manifesto. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is, I do want to enter a little bit of a discussion on the question of our moment, on the question of the optimism in the manifesto. It's really important to recognize these were extremely young men who wrote this, but that's not the point. The point is not even the book. I can burn this book, throw it away. I don't care about the book. The point is they identified a dynamic. When you read the manifesto, there were at the time maybe 500 trade unions in the world. I've looked at it, and I think it's extremely limited. 1848, there were maybe, some hundreds of trade unions, but they were not writing about their present moment. They were identifying the great process of history. That is the power of historical materialism. They are not historians of 1848, okay? When Marx writes the 18 Brumaire, he's not merely reflecting on 1852, on how Louis Napoleon comes and seizes power through, again, a counter-revolution. He's not reflecting on that merely. It's a historical materialist span. He's trying to understand what happened in France in light of world history, in light of that phrase that they so decorously had in the manifesto, the history is the history of class struggles. Wow. What is that? What is this thing called class struggle? 1848, the proletariat is young, and yet they are anticipating the dynamic of history. They're not soothsayers, but they've understood the dialectic. They can see how the contradictions are moving. That is extraordinary, and that's something that we need to teach each other. We have to have confidence in the capacity of history and the contradictions moving in different directions. They are not eternal optimists. Remember, in the manifesto, they said we can either establish socialism or we have the common ruin of contending classes. A phrase that later, when Rosa Luxemburg says socialism or barbarism, hello, Rosa, that's a direct quote from the manifesto. Either you establish socialism or the common ruin of contending classes. This is not unbridled, ridiculous optimism. The attack on Marxism that says, Marxism is teleological, it's a completely straw man argument. Marxism has never said, and by the way, Raju, I believe in the stages of history. I don't have any embarrassment talking about stages. It's a postmodern attack that keeps saying, you are a stagist. Even anybody who has a modern conception of the historical span has to periodize. The very people that say Marxism is to stages, periodize, because you can't, as a human being, understand the complexity of the world without concepts. Stages are merely concepts. They are not a claim to the objective ontological condition of historical motion. They're concepts. When we talk about feudalism, it's a tremendous concept to help us understand the pre-capitalist world. Historical materialism has that sweep. And in the manifesto, Venkatesh is right. This comes before capital, before the tremendous achievement of understanding in a much more scientific footing how capitalism operates. But historical materialism is there in this text, that sweep, the ambition to try to create concepts to understand all of history, not just the history of Belgium, where they wrote the text in Brussels, not just the history of Europe, but the history of the world. It's there in that text. It talks about everything, the battering rams breaking down the Chinese walls, under compulsion. You have to adopt the capitalist mode of production. I mean, for God's sake, the sweep, the ambition of historical materialism should not be underestimated. It's extraordinary. These are not petty academic historians who are studying France from 1870 to 1873 and writing a detailed, important book. Important book, that's important work, but it's not this. And by the way, you can write a book, France 1870 to 1873, which is compelled by the whole sweep of historical materialism. No reason why even a narrow study cannot implot itself within the much broader dynamic of history, the incredible nature of history. I'm in awe of the passage of human history. And that's the reason why I reject the debate which says either the proletariat is revolutionary or the proletariat is not revolutionary. I am not a computer. I don't have to think in binaries, 0, 1, 0, 1. Either the door is they are revolutionary or the door is they are not revolutionary. Comrades, history doesn't function like that. There are always breakthroughs. There are always the appearance of the spontaneous consciousness of exploitation. Workers rebel at different moments. This happens. The question is, what do the socialists do about it? What is our role in the various punctual, spontaneous rebellions of people who are exploited and oppressed, whether they rebel as workers consciously or they rebel under understanding of being in an identity formation or whatever? People rebel punctually, consistently, spontaneously. And the question is, what do the socialists do then? Engels put it very well for me. He argued against the idea that history is linear, that everything leads in a good way. He said history moves in zigs and zags. I love that phrase. I use it all the time. History moves in zigs and zags. It's the point of being a socialist not to sit in the zag and commit oneself to eternal pessimism. I mean, that's the point. It's the tendency to pessimism in our time, which I want to reject. The opposite of pessimism isn't unbridled optimism. In my opinion, the opposite of pessimism, optimism, is that we have a rational, realistic understanding of our situation. We spend the time, take the effort to gauge the weight of the struggles, accompany struggles, build our own capacities inside and alongside the struggles. Why do many of us belong to a political party? We don't belong to a political party either to assess whether we should be optimistic or pessimistic about the moment. We belong in the dynamic in order to influence and move the dynamic. We are not observers from afar, judging with like a litmus test, putting that little piece of paper saying, oh, it's revolutionary now, or oh, it's counter-revolutionary. No, we are actually part of the process, comrades. We are not distant observers, which is why I reject categorically the framing of the question, which is the proletariat revolutionary, is the proletariat not revolutionary? I reject that framing. I think that framing is bourgeois thought. Our assessment must be dialectical. It must be within the dialectic. We must not see ourselves outside it. We must always be tracking the actual movement of history, the actual capacities displayed by the proletariat, always watching for the spontaneous struggles which appear punctually, and then seeing how are we placed as those struggles germinate, as they grow, and so on. Venkatesh is modest. The Kisan Sabha has played exactly this role in the farmers' movement, tracking over the course of the last, whatever it is, 70, 80, 90 years, participating and tracking and building the confidence of different sections of the Indian peasantry, building the confidence, always providing a certain kind of very modest leadership, not trying to substitute for the agricultural laborers or the small farmers and so on, but providing a very much directed leadership. You can provide leadership without arrogance. And that is, I think, the goal of us. We are not observers in this process. We are part of it. There is a grand sweep of history. The Manifesto, in a very, very young way, tries to capture that grand sweep of history. I would encourage young comrades to be enveloped in that grand sweep of history, to feel that they are part of it, and to observe the world not in a detached way, but indeed as very much participants in that grand sweep. There is no position outside that. We are in it. We might as well acknowledge it. We might as well play a role in it. And I hope very much, rather than playing a counter-revolutionary role, we play a revolutionary role. So let's get to it, comrades. We have a lot of work to do, because as those very young men wrote in that Brussels cafe, we have a world to win.
I thank Dr. Vijay Prasad for his inspiring speech addressed mainly to the younger generation. His description of the spread of Red Books Day is really stimulating to hear and to share. And his interpretation of Manifesto as the roots of Manifesto as optimism. Not only that choice of contestation ending in the victory of either class or common ruin of classes, but even inevitability wherever used in the Manifesto basically means human agency making it possible. So it is also open-ended. The term inevitability doesn't have the ringtone of a natural science category, but basically human social science category. So in these few remarks, I thank once again Professor Raju J. Das, Professor Venkatesh Atre, and Professor Vijay Prasad for their illuminating and inspiring ideas and reflections. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Happy Red Books Day.
Chairperson, are we taking any questions?
Is there any other question?
Are we taking any questions, Chairperson? No. No?
Are there any questions from participants? Seshu?
Yeah, hi, this is Saji Gopal. May I ask you a question?
Yeah. Me or somebody else?
Hello?
Yeah, who do you
Can you guys hear me? Yeah, my name is Saji Gopal. Can I ask a question? Yeah? Okay.
You meaning who?
Yeah, my name is Saji Gopal. I'm a civil rights activist.
Whom do you
asking that your question is to whom?
You address your question to whoever you want.
Yeah, Raju Das, right? Okay, Raju Das.
Okay.
The question is, this is the Marx quote: the oppressed are allowed once every few years to decide which particular representatives of the oppressing class are to represent and repress them in parliament. The question is, do you think the parliamentary democracy and the economic issue-based trade unionism, these concepts, these notions, are they really increasing the revolutionary characteristics of the proletariat, or they're diminishing?
Oh gosh, I wish Vijay would answer that. Okay, look.
Well, I'm going to do that.
Okay, look. If there is parliamentary and there is parliamentary criticism, there is election and there is electoralism. When I was growing up, I grew up in an area of CPI, Communist Party of India, and SUCI, Socialist Unity Center of India. I see them usually when the elections come. They are never seen at any other point in time. And this more or less sort of, describes the thing. So Parliament can be a place where revolutionary socialists can present their ideas. But if we think we can use the Parliament to get the majority of the seats and that's how we are going to bring about a revolution, no. Similarly, trade unions, Marx says, workers should be involved in trade union activity. We can even get some concessions. But if you think trade unionism, by doing those activities, you are going to reach socialism, no. Trade unionists, look, one of their underlying ideas is when the economy does well, you can get some concessions. So therefore, many times, the trade unionism promotes collaboration between workers and capital. And you tell me which trade union leader in India from the left movement even talks about socialism and revolution. You tell me one single person in the last 1 year. So rarely we hear about revolution and socialism, even within sort of broader left sort of public lectures and discussions, etc. So my short answer there is, I would not reject parliament, I would not reject election, but electoralism is not the way. Again, trade unionism, Lenin called it the bourgeois politics of the working class, and there is a reason why he called the trade union movement the bourgeois politics of the working class. So in other words, unless all these activities, electoral activities, trade union activities, occur as parts of a revolutionary socialist movement, a movement that also includes fight against onslaughts on democracy, fight against onslaughts on secularism, fights against, let's say, caste oppression, racial oppression, etc. So the socialist movement includes many components. Fight against imperialism, against landlordism, against attacks on democracy, attacks on secularism, and of course fight for concession. So a socialist movement is much more dialectical than just electoralism or trade unionism, ISM, etc., etc. That's what I would say.
Can I supplement this? I mean, I broadly, see the point that Professor Das has made, and I think that's very valid. Lenin also said that trade unions are schools of socialism in a different context. Different experiences that are part of a process of transformation.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Equally possible they fall back and say, we don't want to have anything to do with you. Likewise, you said in the last 1 year, no left leaders talked about socialism. A bit far. In many of the discussions we have in the left, especially in the CPIM from which I come, we constantly discuss the present stage of our struggle as one of people's democracy. In the process, we discuss socialism quite a bit and take both negative and positive experiences historically into account. We don't have the answers, right? I mean, we are honest enough to say we don't have the answers, but we are certainly looking for answers, and certainly we don't think ruling classes ever relinquish power voluntarily. So you're absolutely right. We can't trust the parliamentary process to deliver. Interestingly, Ambedkar, in the course of framing the constitution, and also in another essay of his, says we must build socialism into the constitution so that some new government that comes can't get rid of it. Poor man, he's not able to do it, right? He tried very hard. What we are saying is that as our party program says that in history, ruling classes have never given up their power voluntarily. So the communists must be prepared for all circumstances and all forms of struggle. But we don't have to declare from the rooftops that we'll only do armed struggle. We need to use mass actions, mobilize people in a zillion ways. I mean, the infantile Maoist kind of line is something that I can't buy.
Yeah. I agree, Raj. I mean, in the Indian context, the left, parliamentary left, completely immersed into the bourgeois parliamentary politics without pursuing any revolutionary path or revolutionary program, right? And also that is the reason we see there is a lack of any political program to confront the fascist Hindutva forces. That is the irony what we are facing today.
I must strongly disagree, unfortunately, because having worked with the left for 40 odd years and still being an activist, a lot of criticism is merited in general about the left. But there are segments of the left which work based on a program. They may not always succeed in doing what they want to do, and you're quite right in those instances to criticize them. But to say that the left has completely got lost to the parliamentary system, what were the land reforms in Kerala about? What were the land reforms in Bengal about? We couldn't sustain them, right? That's quite right. Limitations of bourgeois democracy makes it very difficult for communists to survive. Don't forget, the communist movement in India has been illegal for most of its existence. People forget these very simple facts. We finally have some legal existence. I don't know how long it will last, especially with the present dispensation. But given these realities, we must be prepared for all sorts of tactics, including parliamentary participation, but not glorifying it, not making it the most important activity. In fact, one of the party Congress resolutions of the CPIM says that all parliamentary and legislative work must be subordinated to the interests of the mass movement and the class movement. That's our understanding. We may not succeed in doing it. It's much easier to talk. If you're on the ground and try to do it, You succeed sometimes, sometimes you don't succeed, because people are made by their environment. So somebody who's very committed militant today can turn very reformist, 10 years from now. So that possibility always exists. In fact, AKG always used to say, Parliament is like a pigsty, like old Lenin statement. So we are aware of it. We are alert to it, but not everybody is able to withstand repression, for example. You see, you take a comrade like Pravi Purkasa, outstanding engineer. He is in jail for what? He is with us, the left. So it's important that we don't belittle what little left we have. Try and work with it, try and understand its strengths and weaknesses, and try and lend a helping hand. That's what I would appeal. Yeah.
Okay. I'd also very quickly add that if India has seen the largest trade union strikes in the recent past, in the last 5 years or so, it has been almost entirely because of the united activities of the left movement, right? CPI, CPM, and all this liberation, etc., etc. So that has to be accepted. But going back to Mark's point, Mark says the real fruit of these trade union struggles, he said the real fruit of their battles lies not in the immediate result, which can only be temporary. Something given to you today can be taken away tomorrow. He says the real fruit of these battles lies not in the immediate result, but in their ever-expanding union, meaning it contributes to the political consciousness of ordinary people. How else will they become politically conscious? For most people, they don't become politically conscious through lectures and listening to podcasts, etc. They become politically conscious through fighting, through failing, through sometimes winning concessions, sometimes being beaten up by police. But it has to be understood, and especially for left people sitting here in North America, the left in India is not doing this, is not doing that. It's rather to say. But look, if 150 million people or almost 200 million people in some of these national strikes, if this has happened because of the left movement, more or less. I would say more or less, right? But my other problem is, I will stick to this. The left movement, it does not talk about socialist revolution. I don't hear, because they don't think the time in India is right for the fight for a socialist revolution. Tell me which major left party talks about socialist revolution. They talk about, actually, their goal is to bring about a capitalism that is nicer, that is more democratic, less fascistic, more egalitarian, etc., etc. I think that, I have written about this quite a bit, this strangulates, this really narrows the political imagination of the common people, because you don't have a goal of socialism. It's some distant goal. This is where statism is a problem. I agree with Bijay that things happen in stages, of course. But when you are stuck in stages, that is political stagism. Again, I want to reiterate this. Tell me which major leader in the last 12 months has talked about the need for a socialist revolution? Tell me. Which I never hear about this.
Okay. Yeah. Kindly go through the issues of the English Marxist and People's Democracy that we have put out. There are frequent discussions. There are party comrades, classes where we talk about socialism or understanding. We also have a very critical view of existing socialisms. I completely agree with you that we talk about people's democracy and not socialism. That's our understanding of the present stage of the Indian revolution. It doesn't mean that we abandon socialism. That's something being taught to our cadre. It is not something that immediately goes to the people. And wherever we have been in very limited state offices, with very limited powers, these are processes, they're not just outcomes. Processes in Kerala. How did we today, why is it Kerala has the highest wages anywhere in the country in rural areas? Because of the movement that led to the fight against landlordism. So you're right that we're not discussing going to socialism tomorrow. We don't think it's possible. But we are not trying to prop up capitalism. That's the wrong way to look at it. We are trying to weaken capitalism, partly by mobilizing the working classes. But it's not a subjective desire of ours that's going to work, right? It's a subjective condition that also matter. But I agree that the danger of revisionism, of falling back, of complacency, all of that is there. There are no easy solutions, comrades. We have been there for 45, 50 years in the battle. I was studying in the US. I came back to India when the emergency was declared, because what am I doing in the US when there's a struggle going on in India? That's how I came back, and I joined the anti-emergency movement. One of the best things I did in my life. Now, luckily, I was not important enough to be imprisoned. I still don't seem to be important enough for the government to imprison me. But 40, 50 years we are fighting. Right? So, do not belittle the fight to the militants on the ground, but completely be critical, advise us. There are no easy answers. They're looking at every state. I come from Tamil Nadu. I look at Tamil Nadu agriculture. So difficult to find solutions of a progressive kind, within the existing framework. So yeah, your criticisms are well received, but do understand that we also work under extremely challenging conditions. That's all I'm saying.
See, the critique of social conditions or social movement is not to dehumanize. In the Indian context, there are certain revolutionary parties like Communist Party of India, Maoists. They've been raising a revolutionary struggle. We may or may not agree. But the need of the hour is that the neo-fascist forces, all revolutionary, democratic, parliamentary left, everything have to be united and to come with a political imagination and political narrative how to counter this Hindutva fascists, right? That is the Hindutva fascists and the American military-industrial complex. These are the enemies of the proletariat, enemies of the working class, right? So obviously, history has proved always with united front struggle, right? We are able to defeat fascism in past. Learning lessons from historic lessons from fascism, learning lessons from Telangana present armed struggle. We have to come with a new political imagination, right? How to, defeat and effectively fight against it, right? That is the only suggestion. Yeah, thank you.
Comrade, these are nice words. These are very
1 minute.
nice words. I can go along with it. In the South, I'm just going to finish. In the South,
The time
white
is up.
states, we are
The time
putting
is
left
up.
and democratic forces together. Okay. But, certain questions have to be answered. I'm a militant from a party. I'm not just a professor, which also I am, but I'm an independent communist militant. Okay. Let's get that
Just 1
straight.
minute. 1 minute.
Hold it. The time is up. We'll close the program. And I thank all the speakers and participants once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.